Let me just open us up in prayer. Father God, you're so, so good, and we thank you that you're with us. We thank you so much for the privilege of being ministers, being counselors. God, continue to sharpen our skills so that we are more useful. God, we thank you that you created marriage for our enjoyment as well as for our refinement. God, help us all become better marriage therapists today. Help us to grow and to learn, and use me in spite of myself today to communicate your truth. In Jesus' name, amen. So with marriage therapy, I would say more than any other therapy, it's so, so important to have a plan, a theory. You know, even if you make yours up, if you use EFT, if you use imago therapy, it's so important to have a roadmap. I think it's easier to be organic individually. Okay, and so today we're actually going to learn my own, I don't think I'm all that cool, but we're going to learn my own theory on marriage therapy that I've developed over the last dozen years that I've done marriage therapy. Okay, but first, just some important rules about therapy. And you guys have heard me say these first two before, is clients need to believe that you care, and clients need to believe you're competent. And those are so, so important. They want to know that you want to know their story, that you're curious, that you want to hear everything about them. And I think this is the harder one sometimes, they want to know that you're competent and you know what you're doing. And I think sometimes we can get nervous if we're young or we look young. If we haven't done marriage therapy a lot, we can come off nervous, scared, insecure. And I think it's very, very important to come off confidently and trust the process. The process works. Whether or not you've done marriage therapy a lot before or not, marriage therapy works. These theories work. These books I'm going to talk about work. I've done it a bunch of times. I've seen it work a bunch of times. And so the tool works. You don't have to trust in your inexperience. Trust in the tool. And more importantly, trust in God. God is going to use you in spite of yourself to minister to your clients. And that's what he does every session. God comes sovereignly down and uses human beings to do great things. So also, you must keep everyone in the room safe, which means you need to be in charge at all times. If things get heated, you need to stop everything. The counseling room is a safe place, and you know that when you counsel individually. You see that your client feels comfortable in sharing intimate emotions, vulnerable things, difficult things. But if you have a client who shares a vulnerable or a difficult thing, and then you have their spouse go, well, that's stupid. Guess what they're not going to want to do? And so the problem is, and we're going to, as we talk about childhood wounds, is oftentimes as children, when we were vulnerable, that behavior was somehow punished. Not purposely. But we saw that being vulnerable and being honest and open was scary. And it ended up hurting us. And oftentimes in our marriage, it's that way. The counseling room has to always be a safe place. And that's why you need to be in charge. That's why you need to be confident. As soon as clients start speaking over each other, as soon as clients start elevating, you need to stop everything immediately. Whether you have to stand up and go, okay, and get things back. I've literally shushed people, and I tell them I do. I go, she's talking. I do not allow interrupting. Okay, and so, on the first session, I explained my rules. That this is a safe place, and it's my job to keep you safe. You will not interrupt each other. And if you do, I'll interrupt you. Which is, I know, ironic, but it's okay. And so we have to make sure that we're making a safe environment for these people to share with each other so that we can finally get to intimacy. Obviously, you want to explain confidentiality and secret keeping. At times you may meet with clients individually, and you want to make sure that they know that you are not here to keep secrets. That marriage is the client. The woman's not the client, the man's not the client, the marriage is the client. And then if they reveal things, what are you going to do about that? If you reveal that's something we're going to have to work through and bring up to your spouse so that we can heal your marriage. Explain your process. Today I'm going to explain my process. But, can you have an elevator speech? I have an elevator speech on what my process is. And so they understand, okay, this is the direction we're going to go. This is where we're going to start. This is where we're going to end. This is what's going to happen in between. And then last and most importantly, you want to instill hope. and find strengths? Do you want them to know that marriage counseling works? That this can work? That it's not hopeless? And I've seen countless marriages come from the brink of divorce. I literally had a couple that had divorce papers. They brought divorce papers with them to the session. They were ready to get divorced. And every Christmas, they send me a Christmas card with them and their kids, and I'm seeing their kids grow up and grow up. So it was years ago, I saw them, and I only saw them for about 6 months. But they went from literally wanting to divorce to having a happy marriage. Marriage counseling works. So how do we find the positive and still the hope? I love the question, what made you fall in love with each other? Because people coming and they're ready to say, that person's wrong and you need to tell them to fix this. That's usually 99% of the time their goal. They want to tell you what's wrong with their spouse and their spouse needs to change. We need to stop that cycle. We need to stop that habit. Is when a marriage gets negative, it becomes a snowball that has momentum. Okay? And that momentum's going to keep going unless acted on by an outside force. We need to stop the negativity. And so we ask, what made you fall in love with each other? What is great and unique about your spouse? An even stronger question. 5 things. This is a method where you say, what are the 5 things that you fell in love with your spouse? And then you go, what are the 5 things that annoy you most about your spouse? And the funny thing is 95% of the time, they will be the exact same thing. Okay? I love that he was just laissez-faire, and he had no care in the world, and he's lazy and he doesn't work. I loved it that, she was detail-oriented and she never missed anything. She's a perfectionist and she's always attacking me. It's amazing how what they loved about their spouse in the beginning has now become what they hate about their spouse and drives them nuts about their spouse. And so I will have them write it down, and then I go, do you guys see any similarities between these 2 lists? I said, wow, that strength that you so appreciated is now this weakness that you can't stand. The miracle question, what do you want your marriage to look like in 6 months? We know the miracle question. What do you want your marriage to look like in 6 months? If we met for 6 months and we worked on this and things got better, what would it look like? If I walked in your house and you 2 were sitting on the couch, what would I see? What would I hear? What would it be like? I always like to, when people are really angry with each other, remind them the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. I go, the fact that you're even mad at each other shows that you still care. Shows that you're still trying. Shows that you're still passionate about the marriage. People we don't care about can't really affect us much. People that we care about really affect us. And so I explain that and always want to continue to find strengths to work with. What are the marriage strengths and what are each spouse's strengths? Yeah?
How do you keep the 5 things that are running now from invalidating the 5 things that you originally loved?
What we do is we go back to is this was originally a strength that you loved about your spouse. And kind of the point is that their strength hasn't changed, your view of their strength has changed. And so it's almost CBT, is now we have a cognitive distortion on their strength. And I also go on to say is with every strength is a corresponding weakness. It's just a fact. If you have someone that's outgoing, oftentimes they talk too much. If you have an introvert, oftentimes they don't talk enough. I mean, there's a weakness and strength to everything, to every skill. I love my wife dearly, and she is so detail-oriented, and she's so great at remembering things, but sometimes in those details, she gets caught in the details. It's just a fact. It's a fact of people that are good with details. I miss all details, therefore that's not my weakness, but my weakness is I forget things. So the strength is I'm not stressed, strength is I'm more laissez-faire, but my weakness is I forget things. And so I think reminding spouses, of strengths and weaknesses. Because often what happens, and we'll talk about this in a little while, in our marriage, is we judge our partner in their weakness, our strength, and we want grace in their strength and our weakness. As well as we think our strength is more important, and their weakness is where the more important thing is, and their strength is, well, it's not as important. Like I, as a therapist, I'm very good at validating. My wife will tell you, you're great at validating. And in my mind, I think validating is the most important, and I'm good at it. And why doesn't she validate me more? And that's her weakness, is she's not as good at validating. And she's growing and she's getting better and she's rocking it. But it's easy for me to go, well, why doesn't she validate me more? Well, that's just not her strength. But she has so many strengths that she is bringing to the table, that she is giving to me, that I have weaknesses in. Good question. So Tim Keller writes, most striking of all, longitudinal studies demonstrate that 2/3 of those unhappy marriages out there will become happy within 5 years if people stay married and do not get divorced. This is a good statistic that is just fact. 2/3 of the time, if people just stay married, it works out. And this is not even including marriage counseling. Marriage counseling would obviously increase that percent. So I'm going to start with a really happy verse. But those who marry will face many troubles in this life, and I want to spare you from this. Paul was literally warning marriage is hard and difficult, and I want to spare you from it. And I think that's so incredibly important to communicate to our clients, that marriage is hard, because it changes the expectation. We have this fairy tale view of marriage, that we're going to get married and live happily ever after, like every book we've ever read and every movie we've ever watched and every sitcom we've ever seen. Every problem was either solved in a half hour or 2 hours, depending on what you were watching. And therefore, we kind of think that, even though we know that's not real, we've heard enough messages, we kind of do. And then we hit marriage, and then we're shocked. Wow, this is a lot harder than I thought. But marriage can be amazing if you put the work in. So Tim Keller goes on to write, the reason marriage is so painful, yet wonderful, is because it is a reflection of the gospel, which is painful and wonderful at once. The gospel is this: we are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dared believe. Yet at the same time, we are more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope. And that's why I think the gospel is a beautiful way to look at our marriages. Is that, not only is your spouse sinful, they're more sinful than you can even begin to understand. And so are you. And it levels the playing field. The ground at the cross is level. We are all sinners. We have all fallen short of the glory of God. And we love to minimize our sins and maximize, the sins of others, so we feel better about ourselves. But if we can accept the gospel that we are all sinners, there's no room for judgment. And that God loves us and cares for us and brings redemption. That is where we can find great, amazing love in our marriages. So managing expectations, it's not the movies. It's not a romance novel. And I go ahead and I explain that to you. We don't live happily ever after. Every marriage has struggles. And I love to explain to people, I go, so when you guys go out of the house and you go to work or you go to this, I go, do people think you have a happy marriage? Oh, yeah, everyone thinks. And I go, yeah, and that's what everyone else does. Everyone else has their struggles, their skeletons, their yelling, their screaming, their problems. And then they leave the door and put a happy face on, and everyone thinks they have this great marriage. So you know all the problems with your marriage. You know 2% of someone else's problems in their marriage. So statistically, they'd have to be 50 times worse than you for you to think they're equal. The math does work. Because you don't know what's going on in their marriage. So you always think, we have the worst marriage and everyone has this great marriage. No, everyone has struggles in their marriage. And I will self-disclose, I have struggles. I think proper self-disclosure is always good, as long as it's not about you, obviously about the client. And I think done in humility. I love my wife dearly, and we have a Christ-centered marriage, but wow, we struggle and we fight and we go through things. And the more we work, the better it is. And the lazier we get, the harder it is. There's definitely a direct correlation. And if you think about marriage, no one has more trouble with his bride than Jesus. Okay? The church is the bride of Christ, right? And even though the church continually does stupid things and continues sins and continues struggles and continues to represent him poorly, he perseveres. He is patient. And he has healthy boundaries with the church too. And that's what we need to learn, is to be patient, perseverant, as well as still having healthy boundaries. So managing expectation. God is a jealous God. And if we're doing Christian counseling, a lot of what I'm talking about today may be biblically based. Obviously, you just remove the word God if you're doing secular counseling or a couple that is not interested in that. But the principles are the same. I've actually quoted verses to people, and they're fine with it. Actually, one of my favorite verses is coming up is be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. It's hard to argue with that, But God is a jealous God, will not let us be fulfilled in anything in this world other than him, because he's jealous. And we get married hoping this will finally fulfill us and heal us and give us everything we're looking for. And God won't allow that, because he is a jealous God and because he's good, and he wants us to find our first love and our first satisfaction in him. And if you try and go into marriage saying, I'm going to, they're going to heal me and I'm going to feel love, that is way too much pressure to put on one human being. And often what your job is to recognize in marriage counseling, is this person putting too much on their spouse to make them their self-esteem, their ego, their worry. Oftentimes, clients that have high anxiety, in many ways try and get their spouse to manage their anxiety. By, okay, when you do this, make sure you do, and they also micromanaging the person so that they feel better about their anxiety. I'm like, no, that's your anxiety, not his. You need to work on your anxiety. Yes, you can help her. Okay, and so your spouse is not your savior. And I see that all the time, secularly and Christian, is we look to our spouses, they're going to save us. And actually in imago therapy, that's what happens in Harlow Hendrick's book, Getting the Love You Want, imago therapy, we'll talk about that later, is that we marry to heal childhood wounds. We marry saying, I want you to heal me. And then we get mad when they don't. But it's not their job. Healthy individuals equal a healthy marriage. I highly encourage people to be in individual counseling. There's even been times that the marriage is so messed up, I'm like, you know what? Why don't you both go do individual counseling for a while and then come back? You guys get healthy, then we'll come back and do marriage counseling. I think simultaneously is still fine, but the healthier you are as an individual, obviously the healthier your marriage is going to be. We want to recognize in our clients what are beliefs and what are facts. What are those cognitive distortions that they just have an assumption about? I was talking to a client the other day, and he worries every time there's an argument because, and I finally find out, is when he grew up, he never saw his parents fight, ever. So he had this belief that in marriage, you never fight. I'm like, well, in a healthy marriage, you actually do. I go, and there's balance. I go, and it's a shame that your parents never taught you conflict resolution and that you never got to see them actually have an argument. I go, I'm sure they fought, or maybe they didn't and they had a completely passive-aggressive relationship, but you never got to see conflict resolution. And so it's amazing from childhood how many lies we get about what marriage is. The ideal does not exist. Again, we want to keep speaking against that. The goal is growth. It's not going to be perfection. Instilling hope. And the 125 rule. And I usually give off this the first session, and this is actually in my book, is you see 100% of what you do for your spouse, and you see about 25% of what your spouse does for you. So therefore, your spouse would have to do 4 times as much for you to think you're doing equal work. Because it's amazing. I remember for years, all these clients would come in and they both would say, I do more than the other. I'm like, well, that's not even possible. Someone has to be doing more, right? But as I got to investigate, I found out it was a perception issue. See, I know every time I hold my tongue, my spouse doesn't. I know every time maybe I pick up a little thing and put it in the trash, or I do the dishes, or I pick up dog poop, and there's little small things. And in my mind, I'm tallying them. But I didn't catch the time that my wife made the bed, and I didn't catch the time that she bit her tongue, and I didn't catch the time that she, cleaned up stuff before I came from work and made this dinner. And so I'm not always noticing, and so it's not even fair. I'm not catching 75% of what she's doing for me. So to compare is unfair. And that's so, so important to know, is that you think you're doing more than your spouse, and your spouse thinks they're doing more than you. You're both wrong. You both need to stop.
Is there ever a point where one person actually is doing more than
Yeah.
the other person?
It's rare, and I have caught it, and then I will actually speak into that.
Okay.
Absolutely. So, and usually that's a person that's been shut down, and then we have to find out what has made them shut down, what's going on with the shutdown.
Okay. Like in the session, you're saying, so someone usually
Yeah.
shuts down in the session?
But I would say 95% of the time it's fairly equal.
Okay.
off 10%, 20% maybe.
Yeah.
It's rare that I see, it's like an 80-20.
Okay.
Everyone's mind is 80-20, 75, but in reality, it's a rare case. If you compare, work and all the different stuff, and there's gender issues, and there's who's been home more, and who cares more about what the house looks like, and then we get into that, and those are individual things. So, and you want to look for that. That's a good point. There's always look for the exception. Whenever you have a theory, whenever you have a teaching, it's all in generalities. Most of the time this is true. But we have the greatest science in the universe in psychology, and there's an exception to everything. That's the hard part about our science. And so, there's an exception to almost everything I say. So anyway, so that's the 125 rule. So I want to explain my theory, and this is actually what I tell my clients when I first see them. And I explain that the foundation of the house that we're going to build in marriage counseling is protection. That's the foundation. And without a solid foundation, the rest of the house will fall apart. You need to set the foundation. And actually, you spend the most amount of time, if you're building a house, on the foundation. And for me, that's protection, or what we're going to call is safety. Learning to be nice to each other, literally, is we're going to spend the first, maybe even couple months of being nice to each other. It can be as short as 4 or 5 weeks. I actually literally had a client that I saw for a year, and I said, wow, you finally are out of the basement. You finally have made the foundation, and now we can move to trust. We can move to affection. And so we have protection as the foundation. Affection is the next phase. I would consider it, the family room and the kitchen, is that we're going to do the essentials, and we're going to build trust. And lastly is connection or intimacy. And here we'll say safety, trust, and intimacy. It is not safe to try and have intimacy with someone who's not safe. If I can't trust one of the spouses to accept someone's emotions well, then I'm doing my client a disservice. If I tell, the wife, hey, this is a safe place, and I want you to share your struggles, and she goes, and this is, and when I was a kid, and this is, and then he goes, well, that's just stupid. You don't realize it, and all of a sudden, what does she get? She's shut down. And there is no greater hurt than when you open your heart and you're vulnerable in your hurt. We have to avoid that at all costs. And in my theory, that's why we take so long to get to it. Is that we build up the fair fighting guidelines. We build up assertive communication and boundaries, and we build up reflective listening, and we get to know all these things. And then we get to trust, and we'll go over all three of these. Then once those are established, we can finally get to true intimacy and health, and find out what the childhood wounds are and what the issues are. And you can finally start seeing each other as just wounded individuals, where you now have sympathy and empathy and love for each other and not disdain. So the first is protection, the foundation of marriage counseling, in my opinion. We are going to secure the foundation of safety. And this is literally where you're going to say to your spouse, you're not my enemy. In each one of these, there's a statement I want them to say to their spouse. And literally, the first thing I want them to say is, you're not my enemy. And that's what they're going to have to learn. Because as they're coming in, oftentimes, 90% of the time, 10% of the time I get people that actually have a good marriage and they just want to make it better, but that's rare. People don't usually go to the doctor when they're well. It's usually things have gone crazy. Someone used the D word, and now what? And so we want to literally just establish that they're not enemies, okay? Ellen Boder from the Gottman Institute writes, the latest research in neurobiology shows that emotional safety is one of the most important aspects of a satisfying connection in a loving relationship. When our body and mind experience safety, our social engagement system enables us to collaborate, listen, empathize, and connect, as well as be a creative, innovative, and bold in our thinking and our ideas. This is what's behind safety. This is what's behind protection. Is that we're creating a safe place for people to finally open up and trust. Because they don't know how. And in many ways, they may not know how to not retaliate. Because they're so wounded and they're so hurt. You know, a corner dog doesn't growl because it's angry. A corner dog growls because it's scared. And what I have in front of me when I have a couple is I have two scared, wounded individuals that they think the other person is a mean, growling, rabid dog. But really, it's just a wounded, scared puppy. And we have to change their view. And that's how I view it. And so in protection, a lot of it is psychoeducation. Literally just teaching them how to be married. I think most people don't know how to be married. Years ago, I bought a lawnmower and I got a 28-page manual. I did not need a 28-page manual on how to use a lawnmower. When I got married, no one gave me a manual. No one gave me a manual when I brought my kid home from the hospital either. The two times you actually need a manual in life, you don't get one. And all we know is kind of what our parents did and what we've seen on television. So where are we learning how to have a good marriage? And so really a lot of the beginning of marriage counseling is psychoeducation. Don't assume they know what comes natural to you. You guys are therapists. You naturally have a high emotional IQ. You naturally validate. You naturally reflect. You naturally listen. You've been taught. And it's your strength. You know, and I think one of the greatest aspects a therapist can have is understanding that everyone thinks differently than you. Everyone has different strengths. Everyone has different motivations. You need to understand that your clients don't think like you. They're not therapists, probably. Actually, I see a few therapists. And so you have to understand where they're coming from and understand where their baseline is. You know, you may have a couple that thinks that physically hitting is okay. They might think that. They might think screaming is okay. They might think calling each other names is okay. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I've had clients that think that's okay. And I've had to explain, no, we're going to establish some rules. You know, and that handout we have is, why arguing doesn't work. On the back of that is the fair fighting guidelines. And I give 2 copies out, one for each, because, they're not sharing at this point because they're not getting along. And I said, I want you to read this, and we're going to go over this. And the next session, I will go over it. And I go, okay, here are the rules. Are there any you disagree with? Are there any you don't understand? Are there any you're excited that you're finally going to do? And so I discuss the fair fighting guidelines with them. So what are the rules? We're going to also explain what are the rules of marriage and what are the rules of marriage counseling. Okay. In Rogerian, we want unconditional positive regard, and we want to let people tell their stories. So not only do I want the client to tell their story, I want to make sure the other one doesn't interrupt during the story. And I'm going to teach them very quickly, you will not interrupt in my room. It's not going to happen. I will stop you every time. And then I will go back. I go, we'll get back to you. And I understand you want to be heard, but it's like there's one microphone. I did a video years ago on Stenzel Clinical, and I said, you can get a hairbrush, and one person has the microphone and one person's the audience. And if whoever has the hairbrush gets to talk. No, there's a limit of 5 minutes, is usually what I say, is you get 5 minutes, and the other person gets 5 minutes, and then you get 5 minutes. But it stops as you need a speaker and an audience. You can't have 2 speakers. Like if you guys all started speaking while I was speaking, that would make no sense. It wouldn't work. There'd be no hearing. And so that's why it's so important that we have one speaker and one listener. CBT, we want to change the thought and the behavior and the emotional thought. We want to change their thought about their spouse, their thought about marriage, their thought about themselves, thought about relationships, and then therefore their behavior and emotional change, as well as EFT. EFT, I did the 5-day training, got so much out of it. It was a great training. I think there was a lot there. And I'll be quoting some stuff from EFT today, but you want to specify change strategies and interventions. In other words, that's a good way to say is go over the arguing article and explain this is how we're going to do this, that, and the other thing, okay? Which I'm going to go over quickly. I know a lot of you guys know these things, and so I want to go over, but I do want to go over them fairly quickly. So the question is, how do we create emotional, physical, and spiritual safety in a relationship? That's what protection is about. That's what the foundation is about. And this is the verse I quoted before, and this is what I base the entire foundation on, is being quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And when I do conflict resolution talks, I do conflict resolution talks at a lot of different churches. This is what I literally base my outline on. If you can master these 3 things, you're going to rock your marriage, and you're going to have a safe foundation. Because in America, we are quick to speak, slow to listen, and incredibly quick to get angry. Just go on Facebook. You will see. So be quick to listen. In the arguing article, you see, you have people that argue over and over and over again. And I had a husband once, and he goes, my wife is just so irrational. I said, well, tell me more. Well, I keep giving her these rational arguments, and she doesn't believe me, and she doesn't understand it, and it never works. And I said, can I ask you a question? Sure. How rational is it to keep giving rational arguments when they don't work? And he's like, and the wife's kind of smiling. And I go, secondly, how rational is it to give rational arguments to someone you think is irrational? And he was stumped, and the wife had a big smile. Because honestly, she needed that one. And some people say you don't take sides. There's times you take sides. You are for the marriage, but there are some issues that the husband is worse at or the wife is worse at. And that's okay. Now, that there's probably a corresponding issue. There might be enabling, there might be codependence, so you want to be very careful to not just see the very obvious sin and miss the enabling that maybe is feeding it. So what is the definition of insanity? Trying the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Arguing doesn't work. And I won't go over a lot of that. You can see that in the arguing article. John Gottman says, human nature dictates that it's virtually impossible to accept advice from someone unless you feel that person understands you. And so that applies to us as therapists, but even more applies to the spouse. Earn the right to be heard. And I probably say that statement every single session for 8 or 10 sessions. Earn the right to be heard. Listen first. So in Proverbs it says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. And so funny that I'm saying that while I'm talking about listening. Because listening isn't just not talking. Listening does involve talking. Listening means you ask questions. Listening means you validate. Listening means you reflect. So when I have to explain to them, yes, when you're listening, but that doesn't mean you're not talking. I know it sounds funny. But, we nod. So funny, Zach was telling me that at his class that every person was like nodding, going, because it's a class for therapists. It's what we do. We kind of nod and go, We don't even know we do it. I've had people point it out to me. I'm like, I didn't even know I was doing that. And so that's part of active listening is literally talking, to explaining that we get what we're talking about. So we talk about validation. Emotional validation is the process of learning about, understanding, and expressing acceptance of another person's emotional experience. Emotional validation is distinguished from emotional invalidation, in which another person's emotional experiences are rejected, ignored, or judged. And notice it doesn't say fact. It says emotional experience. Because realistically, facts, though are important, really what matters to us is how we experience the world. And honestly, we don't even really see any fact. We interpret the entire world through our brain, through our eyes, through our ears, through our schema, as CBT would say, or paradigm. So everything that happens to us is just a perception through our belief system. And so it's okay to start explaining and teaching this, is that everyone has an emotional experience. Even the man who thinks he doesn't have emotions. You'll run into those. Fortunately, we're running into less as this generation's growing up. Praise God for the millennials and the Gen Zs, is they're finally understanding men can have emotions, and then men can be sad, and men can be afraid, and men can cry. It's amazing. And this is what I love about this new generation coming up. It's getting easier. Trust me, I still have some 50-year-old men that they either feel fine or angry. Those are their two emotions. That's it. Now, obviously, they feel more than that. That's all that they can see. And so when you have that, you get a feelings chart out, you start teaching about feelings. So validating, and this is, again, the psychotherapy, that psychoeducation we are teaching them. You know all these things, okay? Learning to listen, to hear, and learn. Being curious. Speak from your spouse's point of view. So, wow, I can see from your perspective that you feel. Don't add your judgments, and that usually they struggle with that. And so what I do is I have them do assertive communication and validation in front of me, and then I just stop them every time they mess up. And I said, okay, that was a good try. However, what do you think you might have done wrong there? Well, I don't know. Well, you added your judgment, and that almost always happens. So what I hear you saying is that because you feel that I'm a jerk, that you needed to yell more. Like, that was a judgment. You added that. You put into that. She didn't say those words. You inferred that. Reiterate the emotion of your spouse is expressing, obviously. Remembering emotions are not sin. And obviously non-Christian, they're not wrong. Emotions are emotions. Behaviors are sins. Behaviors are wrong. Emotions are emotions. We feel emotions. We're most like God when we feel emotions. That's a whole other CEU. Do not try and manage your spouse's emotions. And I see this all the time. And unfortunately, I see this often with older men. It's because they can't handle their wives' emotions. It's just too much. They would rather face a mugger in a dark alley than an emotional woman. Because with the mugger, and I've literally asked men this, they know what they're getting, they think they have a chance, and they know there's an end. But they're like, well, okay, if my wife's upset, what's going to happen? And they lose their mind. And I'm like, and one of my favorite questions to ask is, does it physically hurt you when she's upset? And it's like I'm speaking Greek. They're like, well, no. Well, why are you so afraid when she's upset? And there's just so much cognitive distortion in there. So much of what they grew up with, so much of misunderstanding, so much of misunderstanding what emotions are. And that's why, again, the psychoeducation is so incredibly important. Don't assume your client even knows what emotions are and what the rules about emotions are. And so just assume ignorance and teach more than you think you need to. Because it's amazing how much we assume our client knows. They know way less than you think. And then divide that by 2. Seriously, it's even less than you think. Most people don't understand simple things that we know as 101 basics as therapists. Pause your emotions for the moment. And I always say, you know what? Okay, I know you're upset. So the one person's asserting. And I said, you know what? We're going to get to that. And I always say, we're going to get to that when it's your turn. So I need you to pause that emotion. I need you to put it in a little box. And I need you to now focus on your wife and hear what she's saying. Can you do that? And so what we do is we keep practicing in session and keep practicing in session and keep practicing in session because I can be the referee. And I can stop them when they're doing it wrong. And then I can praise them when they're doing it right. And sometimes I've had people that are so bad at it that I said, well, do you know what, can I try? And then I'll make the validating statement. Wow, so it seems like what you're trying to say is that you feel really hurt, that your husband interrupts you, that he doesn't praise you, and you just feel like you're invisible. She's like, oh, yes. And I go, see? That's how she's going to react. Now you try. And it's literally coaching. Psychoeducation and coaching. Getting them to do it over and over till it becomes natural. Because this creates safety. When you're not sure, I said, it's okay, clarify. Okay, I think I heard you were angry or you were sad about it. I'm not sure. Which was it? And that's okay. And that's what validating does, is when we say it, then the person can then correct it. Yeah, I was like that, but really more like this. And that's okay. You don't have to agree. I think it's very important to say, you don't have to agree with someone's emotion or someone's view to validate. Wow, I can see why that would upset you. And I do it all the time. And honestly, what I'll do is usually the person that's arguing that, I go, wow, you know what, that theory probably doesn't seem right to you. That's upsetting to you. You don't agree with that at all. I say, yeah. I go, yeah, I just validated you without agreeing with you. Oh. And so model. You want to continually model what you're looking for. And obviously is not trying to fix your spouse. And I could go into that, is explain to them, their spouse isn't broken. Though we want to help our spouse grow, they're not broken. They're not an object to be fixed. And usually fixing is about me. I don't feel comfortable with you doing this. That's about me. And that's really a long way of fixing me. Maybe I need to just be more comfortable with what's going on with you. So Ecclesiastes, sorrow is better than laughter because the sad face is good for the heart. One of my favorite verses. And I've shared this with non-Christians and Christians. That emotions are good. Emotions are healthy. And you know that as therapists. But we need to communicate that to our clients. Again, don't assume they get it. Okay? And so we want the spouses to be present. We want them to reflect back what they hear. To put themselves in his or her shoes. If you had gone through what she went through, what would you be feeling? How would that affect you? Understanding other people's beliefs and experiences. We want to normalize and we want to empathize when we can. And so these are the skills we want to teach the spouses to do for each other. So these are some of just kind of the examples you can do, is sitting someone and say, I can understand why you're mad. I'm guessing you're feeling pretty hurt. Yeah, that would upset me too. In light of what just happened, why wouldn't you be scared? Most people would. That's one of my why wouldn't you is one of my favorite counseling statements. Because usually people doubt their own emotions. Like, what? This happened at work and I'm really scared. I'm like, why wouldn't you feel scared? And it's so funny. I've had more clients compliment that statement than anything. I've had so many compliments going, Grant, that normalized my emotion more than anything. I've had clients go, like 6 months ago you said, well, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you be scared? Why wouldn't you be angry? Why wouldn't you be anxious about that? Because it's such a great normalizing statement. So you can use that individual counseling as well as teaching spouses to validate each other. I don't blame you for feeling hurt. Considering what you've been through, this must be very difficult to deal with. You have a good point. And you can give these to them. Literally, it's okay to literally feed them the right answer until they can come up with it themselves. I mean, it's like kindergarten. We're going to keep teaching and keep teaching and keep teaching and keep teaching. Repetition. Humans learn by repetition. If you think about it, in second grade, when you learned addition, they didn't just explain addition. You did it all year round. You did it for an entire year. Why? Humans learn by repetition. If people could be healed by reading a book, they would just read a book, get the information, and then change. Why do psychotherapists exist? Because we coach and we help and we remind and we repeat. We need to hear messages over and over and over and over again to get out the messages that we already heard over and over again that were wrong. We need to replace those thoughts. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. There's so much in this verse. Is loving our enemies, being happy when your spouse is happy, being sad when your spouse is sad, meeting their emotions, and doing everything to live in harmony. And so this is simple, is when clients are looking for an example, I'm like, well, here's 2 examples. Well, I wouldn't have to yell if you would just listen. Or, I'm sorry you feel I yell too much. I can understand why that would upset you. I go, which do you think is going to work better? I go, even if you disagree, how do you think your spouse will react to this one? How do you think your spouse is going to react to this one? How would you react to this one? And how would you react to this one? And sometimes you have to kind of sell. I'll even say, look, I realize the I statements and the validating and the normalizing can seem cheesy. It can seem contrived. It can seem very in the rules. But if you keep doing it, it does become natural. And just because it seems very mechanical doesn't mean it's not good. And doesn't mean it's not helpful. Because it works. And it's been proven over and over and over and over and over and over again. And if you look in any theory, they all will teach you about assertive communication, I statements. Okay, so getting to slow to speak. That was being quick to listen and being slow to speak. A Mayo Clinic says being assertive means that you express yourself effectively and stand up for your point of view while also respecting the rights and beliefs of others. Both of those are so incredibly important. It's good to stand up, but it's good to respect. Again, something we need to learn in America is that we can respect the other person while disagreeing with them. And honestly, the funny thing is, then it's more effective. Even if it's not just better, it's more effective. You're going to have a better conversation with someone that you respect and you listen to them. It's really just that simple. But when we get angry in marriage, rational thought goes on out our brains. And then we just think if we're louder, we'll be heard better. If I say the same thing over and over and over again, then maybe they'll hear me. So I love asking, well, you've repeated that 10,000 times now. Do you think the 10,000 first time is going to work? No. So in Proverbs it says, he who conceals his hatred has lying lips. And so this is what I would say to passive-aggressive people, people that will not speak up for truth. In the books that I'm going to be handing out this semester, Changes That Heal, Henry Cloud goes on to talk about the balance of grace and truth. And the balance of grace and truth almost applies to everything. And it applies to communication. You can have someone that's too much truth. They're just always telling you everything you do wrong. You could have someone that's too much grace. They just let everything go. But the problem is this person is angry and eventually is going to be passive aggressive, and this person is negative and going to wear this person down. The balance is speaking up in truth, speaking the truth in love. Also, and this is so incredibly important, when words are many, sin is not absent. That is one of the best verses I can give for marriage. When words are many, sin is not absent, but he who holds his tongue is wise. And I obviously mean that in an argument. I don't mean that in you're having a nice dinner and you're talking about your day. But when you're in conflict, I really truly feel after 5 sentences, your spouse stops listening and starts defending. I think you have about 3 to 5 sentences to explain your point before they start picking your argument apart. And so what I encourage you, go to your spouse, say 3 to 5 sentences, drop the mic, and stop speaking. Their brain doesn't have a chance to get defensive. Their brain doesn't have a chance to start picking it apart. And now they have to think about it. Now they have to process it. But if you make your point, and then make your point, and make your point, and you 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 make your point, people are naturally don't want to be told what to do. People are naturally defensive, especially when it comes to something they may be doing wrong. And so we think with more words we're heard better. And I will also tell clients, if your spouse is yelling or if your spouse is repeating, they feel unheard. The ironic part is it makes you more unheard. Yelling does not make you heard better, and repeating does not make you heard better. Slowing down, saying 3 to 5 sentences, dropping the mic, and just letting them sit with it. Way more effective. They will hear it better. It's amazing. And it's biblical. Assertive communication, and I always like to say it does not mean you will get your way. Oftentimes when I first teach individuals or couples assertive communication, they're like, well, it didn't work. I didn't get what I wanted. I'm like, that's not the point. The point is you're speaking up for you. Whether or not you get what you want, you're standing up for yourself. I do a lot of inner child work with my clients. And I said, when you stand up for yourself, you're telling your inner child, you have value. And I want to stand up for you because you matter. When you don't stand up for yourself, you're like, shh, you don't matter. Everyone else matters more. I love inner child work because it teaches us to value ourselves. And when we're assertive, we're valuing ourselves. When we're not, we're not. So it's respectful. I always ask, clients in the marriage, when they don't want to say what their spouse is doing wrong, I go, would you want to know if you're doing something wrong? Oh, yeah. So you want your spouse to tell you if you're doing something wrong, but you don't want to tell them, right? Help me with that. Help me understand that. And then honestly, that speaking up and asking someone for what you want is the most respectful thing you can do. Because when you say, well, I'm not going to tell them, you're saying, I don't believe you can, I don't believe in you, I don't believe you care. That's what you're communicating. I don't believe you care enough to change. I don't believe you have the ability to change. I think you're too stupid to change, so I'm just going to deal with you. And the problem is that it always comes out passive-aggressively anyway. So assertive communication brings balance. It acknowledges your spouse is not a mind reader. I cannot tell you how many times I have to stop sessions and go, you're reading your spouse's mind. And no offense, you're wrong. Because we mind read all the time. Because we think we know what our spouses are thinking. And we're wrong because we think differently. They're a different gender, they're from a different family, they're a different culture, they have a different background. There's so many reasons they're thinking differently than you. What makes you think you know? So assertive communication, obviously healthy whether you get what you want or not, and helps avoid resentment and passive-aggressive behaviors. Always reminding them, using a respectful tone, keeping your emotions in check. I would say if you're upset, don't say it. Go off, calm down, come back. There's very few people that can truly hear something openly if you're angry or upset in your tone of voice. And oftentimes we think we can be calm. I used to do this. I used to think that, and my kids could probably tell you, is that I would get upset and I would speak in a calm voice. And I felt that this worked. And then I was managing my emotions. And what I found out, it just scared my daughter to death as soon as I used that verse, that tone, because she knew that meant I was angry. I wasn't faking anyone out. Now, I was calmer, which is better technically, but I was still upset. I needed to go off and calm down so I could go to my daughter or go to my spouse calmly. And we're going to talk about, our frontal lobe versus our amygdala later. Is when we're in our amygdala, we think we're rational, we're not. And it takes an hour to calm down from adrenaline. We need to calm down, we need to get to our frontal lobe. Timing is important. We do not grab our spouses as they're running out the door. We don't grab our spouses after a hard day. We don't, for example, my wife is a morning person and I'm an evening person. And so she is not supposed to bring important things to me first things in the morning, and I'm not supposed to bring important things to her late at night. And the thing is, we both have, and it's never gone well. And so, okay, then afternoon would be a great time for us to talk. So knowing your spouse, knowing when is a good time to talk to your spouse. Obviously, do not speak down to your spouse. If you're worried about how to do it, is practice. Practice in the mirror, practice with a friend. Hey, I want to make an assertive communication to my spouse. How does this sound? And even sometimes just saying it out loud, even if you're not telling someone, you can understand, well, yeah, that doesn't seem right. And no is not a bad word. And that's a talk for another CEU, but obviously is teaching people that there's so many people that think they can't say no. And no is such a positive, great word, especially in marriage. And you guys know this, so I'm just going to, is teaching them, I feel blank when you, could you? I feel sad when you come home and go straight to the computer. I would like it if you came in and saw me out first. And again, I go, I know it seems formulaic, but we're going to do it. We're going to keep doing it until it's natural. And it's amazing how it just works. Because if you start a statement with you, people will naturally get defensive. If you start a statement with I, which is owning, I am owning my sadness. I'm not saying you make me sad. I'm saying I am sad. And this is what I would like different. So lastly, in protection, is slow to become angry. Anger is obviously the toxicity of marriage. And whether it's passive-aggressive, whether it's yelling, anger will demolish your marriage, even though anger is not in itself wrong. Ephesians 4:26. Be angry, yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. And that's why I like to tell clients, it's okay to be angry. The question is, what are you going to do with your anger? So most clients think this, and I know you guys get this one too, is something happens and we respond. You came home late, that made me mad, right? So the action of you coming home late made me mad. Obviously, that's not true. You guys know this. This is, CBT 101, is that there's a cognition, there's a belief. And we have to explain to them, and most people don't understand it because it happens so quickly, that we filter everything through our belief system. When I'm trying to explain it to a client, I said, road rage. I go, one person gets cut off and loses their mind, and one person gets cut off and goes, I go, well, it can't be the stimulus then. It's the exact same stimulus. If the stimulus caused the response, then the stimulus would cause the same response every time. There has to be something else. And it's our interpretation, our cognition, our belief of whether we have the right to be cut off or not. And we teach them that this is where we're going to work. This is what we're going to change. We're going to change our belief. We're going to change our cognition so that we can stop blaming our spouse for everything. In Romans it says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And this is what we want to do. Obviously, CBT, we want to renew their mind. We want to renew their thoughts about their marriage and about anger. And here's 4, in my perceptions, that are going to get us in trouble. That I'm good, people are good, the world is getting better, and the world is fair. Now, I think obviously humans have a value. Humans have a great value. Humans can be good. I go, but if I believe in these, and when they don't happen, I'm going to get really upset. And realistically, we have to accept this, is that, your spouse is not perfect. And your spouse is good, but not perfect. And they're going to sin against you, and you're going to sin against them. And the world is not fair. And honestly, as a Christian, I'm elated that the world is not fair, because if the world was fair, I'd be in hell. That would be fair. I don't want to pay for my sins. We usually want fairness for other people. We want grace for ourselves. No, but some people, and you'll notice as you counsel, oftentimes one person is more of a grace person, one's more of a fair person, and fair is important to them. And we have to teach them is that, we have to redefine fair and help them understand that fair is their perception of what they think is fair. And fair is only in the court of what they want, and then they don't want fairness when it comes to their sins. So, This again is just your spouse is going to sin against you. Your spouse is going to let you down. Your spouse is not going to meet your expectations, fulfill you. They're going to have a bad day. They're going to be moody. They're going to say mean things, and they're not going to meet all your desires. Managing expectations is the best way to manage anger. Anger comes out of unmet expectations. I expected my wife to. I expected my husband to. And they didn't. Now I'm angry. But if I know that, my wife has a bad day at work and she's kind of crabby and she's like, I'm like, oh, okay, my wife's human. I've had bad days. She's having a bad day. And then I give her grace. And then the night goes fine. But if I'm like, well, what's wrong with you? I had an expectation that she needs to be perfect every day and never have a bad mood. Well, if I have that expectation, then I should put that on myself. And I know I can't because I'm moody. I'm way more moody than my wife, actually. And she's been very gracious about it. And she goes, are you kind of in a mood? I'm like, yes. She's okay. Thank you for letting me know. She just backs off a little. It's good. But it's interpreting and understanding expectation. A fool shows his annoyance at once, but a prudent man overlooks an insult. And so obviously, though assertive communication is so incredibly important, there's times to step back. And again, there's balance of grace and truth. There's a time to speak. There's a time to be quiet. There's a time to talk about it. There's a time to let it go. And we have to find that balance. And usually we're all completely out of balance. Timeouts. I always tell clients we have to go through timeouts. And the next slide is going over this, is explaining the prefrontal cortex, explaining the amygdala, is that as soon as you're upset, you are now in your amygdala. You are now in fight or flight. You are not thinking rationally. You think you are, you're not. Call time out, walk away, stop. Because everything that's said now is going to get worse and worse and more toxic, and you're going to say something you regret. It's amazing the things we say in anger in marriage that we would never say to anyone on the street. In many ways, I just want to teach people to be cordial. Like, treat your spouse like you would treat a stranger would be a step up. And that's kind of what I'm doing in the first session. I'm like, hey, can we get you to treat your spouse like you would treat a stranger? That you'd be nice. That's the goal. But no one starts out calling someone a bad name or starts attacking someone. We escalate. We get worse and worse and worse. And then we attack more and more and more because we think we need to attack more and more and more. And that's why, and I tell clients, either of you can call a timeout. And as soon as the timeout, it has to be honored. You have to walk away for an hour. But, and this is the part a lot of people miss, is so usually there's someone that always wants to deal with it. There's a fighter and a flighter, right, in the marriage. And the flighter is like, sweet, I don't have to talk about this again. And the fighter's like, oh, no, that's not fair. Because that flighter has probably flown from 100 different things. And the fighter's like, we never resolved it. They always walk away and we never talk about it. And that's why we have to say, look, yes, we're going to walk away for an hour or a day, but then we're going to come back. And so the person that says, time out, and what you do is you say, I am too upset to hear you. I am too upset and I'm afraid of what I might say. I need to go calm down. However, in an hour after I've calmed down, I would love to come back and hear what you have to say. You have to promise to come back. So, go backwards. So you have to be self-aware. You have to know if you're being angry. And oftentimes I talk about physicality. I feel anger when I feel it here. And so sometimes clients don't immediately know. I go, if you start getting that pain or that thing in your neck or that thing, your hands start twitching, ask them, what do you feel when you're angry? Do that, call time out. This is going to save an immense amount of pain. Because we can forgive nasty words, but we don't forget nasty words, and they stick with us. So, and also, if you can't call time out and then get the last word in. Okay, I've had clients do that, and then the clients are complaining, but then he said, I'm like, okay, that's not fair. Call time out, walk away. And I know it's hard, because we have this thing we want to say. But explain to your client's not hearing you anyway. Your spouse is not hearing you anyway. They're not hearing you. All they're doing is talking. You have two people doing this. No one's hearing anyone. Because when you're angry, you're not hearing, you're talking. And obviously, we do not want to interrupt, because it's disrespectful. So, understanding your spouse is hurting. This is actually my dog, Ozzy, from years ago. He was a very angry dog. It was just after a bath, and we were drying him, and he didn't like to be dried. But we need to reframe who our spouse is and what's going on with our spouse. And we need to understand that our spouse is acting in pain, not anger. Yes, it's anger, but there's something underneath. As I said, the corner dog is not growling and biting and showing its teeth because it's angry. It's doing it because it's scared. And we as humans are scared and we're hurt. And when we're hurt or we're scared, what do? We either retreat or we go to anger. And so what are spouses doing? They're moving away from their spouse because they're scared, or they're powering over and getting angry. And neither works. But if you can see what's going on with your spouse. The other day, my wife is awesome, and she's very, very believes in a good diet. And we just did Whole30, and she's very excited about always eating well. And I don't eat well, and she is helping me do that. And the other day, I was just like, okay, I don't need you to tell me how to eat one more time. And I was just in a mood. And she goes, you know what, Grant? And she kind of went into this, and I just stopped and I said, honey, I love the fact that you care about me so much that you want me to eat healthy so that I'll be well. So I looked at her motive. Okay, I reframed. I was honestly sick of her telling me how to eat. But I stopped and I asked myself, what is she really doing? Is she really out to get me? Is she really out to annoy me? No, her motives were good. I wanted to look at what was underneath. What was her motive? Her motive is she cares and she wants me to live long so that we can live long together. And when I'm well, I do that well. When I don't, would you stop? Which obviously doesn't work well. So understanding that our spouse has a motive and to not always misinterpret it. In the middle of an argument, if you're not ready to call time out, this is a great statement to say is, you're not my enemy. In the middle, tell your clients, in the middle of our try it, you're not my enemy. You're not my enemy. Because it reminds you that you do have an enemy, and it's not your spouse. Because in the argument, we think our spouse is our enemy. We think they are trying to hurt us, and I'm trying to hurt them. There is an enemy that wants to destroy your marriage, but it's not your spouse. You are two people that came and want to love each other. And I've had clients that were so upset with each other, I literally made them both stand up, hold hands, and face each other. It's really hard to yell at someone from 8 inches away. And every time I've done that, when I've got them escalating, I'm like, okay, stand up, face each other, hold hands. Now we're going to continue the conversation. And all of their voices always drop. Because they have to. You can't be, people can, but especially not in a counseling office. Usually that drops their defenses. The physical touch helps them connect. And it helps de-escalate. And just the eye contact helps. Remember, and they can say this, is that, you want to be loved and they want to be loved. And to say that to your spouse, I love you and I know you want to be loved. You're just two people that want to be loved. And if you can remember that it becomes less adversarial. If someone's doing something poorly or mean, you can say, well, I see that you're trying to connect. Now, it's not working for me, but I see that you're trying to connect. So the movie War Room, which I just thought was absolutely incredible. If you haven't seen it, you should go see it. Miss Clara said, this is where I do my fighting. It's called my war room. And her war room was a prayer closet. She said, this is where I fight my husband. And she was struggling with her husband in the movie. And so she would go into her war room and she would pray. And she says, this is where I war, because that's the enemy. This is where I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight on my knees. And prayer works. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Miroslav Volf says, forgiveness flounders when I exclude the enemy from the community of humans, even as I exclude myself from the community of sinners. Again, this is a kind of a CBT thing, understanding that my spouse is human and that I am a sinner. And really just changing that thought, changing my perspective is my spouse is human and they're going to fail. And guess what? I fail too. I might be more right in this situation, but there's been plenty of times I've been more wrong. And humility can change a marriage. So forgiveness, and again, don't assume they understand what forgiveness is. I have so many clients that have a misunderstanding of forgiveness. And first and foremost, forgiveness does not mean it's fine. I have so many clients that think, well, if I forgive them, then they're not punished. And if I forgive them, they're let off the hook. I'm like, no. I go, you can't forgive something that's not wrong. If it's not wrong, there's no forgiveness. If you're saying it's just fine, that means it wasn't wrong. I go, it's the exact opposite. If you forgive someone, you're saying you did wrong, and now I forgive you. And often anger has to be the first step in forgiveness. Something has to be wrong. And, for Christian clients, this works very well. Is we forgive as Christ forgave us. That obviously our spouse cannot sin against us as much as we have sinned against God. And therefore we forgive that way. And forgiveness is, again, for our own healing, and we teach our clients that. And I will not continue on to that. You guys understand that. And so getting to affection. I know that was kind of a long time getting through safety. And that's a lot of psychoeducation. But affection, which is the kitchen. Building day-to-day nourishing trust. So we're going from the foundation saying, you're not my enemy. And now we want to say, you're my friend. You're my sojourner. You are with me. We are partners. And so we want to start building trust. So now that we have a safe place, that we're no longer attacking each other. Now we feel heard. Now we can start building trust. In Romans 12, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves, never lacking in zeal. Keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope. Patient in affliction. Faithful in prayer. I love that. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Such a great, you could pick apart every single part of this is what is going to bless your marriage. So in Gary Chapman says, psychologists have concluded that the need to be loved is a primary human emotional need. Their spouse needs to feel love. I love John Eldredge. He wrote a book, Love and War, and he's just very, very honest about it. This is what I love about John Eldredge. He's just very honest. And he said, it dawns on me that I relate to my marriage like I relate to my health. So he and I are similar. I do the bare minimum to get by, hoping to get away with my indulgences and my neglect. Throwing down some communication or a bit of romance now and then, I ignore my health for the most part and hope for the best. This is the point we want to get your clients to, is honesty. Honesty and humility. Can you admit you're not trying as hard as you probably could? You're not putting the effort that you could put into it. Because you know why we have that belief, going back to the belief systems, we think marriage is easy. We think marriage should just be natural. There is nothing natural and nothing easy about marriage. Marriage is hard and it's hard work. And if you put the hard work in, it's amazing. And if you slough off and you're lazy, it gets worse. And I have clients tell me this all the time. I had a client in the other room. They're like, you know what, Grant? When we remember the things we're supposed to do, and they have this plaque of things that they dedicated to each other that we did in session. They go, when we remember those and read those and do those, our marriage is awesome. But when we get lazy and we slough off, wow, it is so quickly we are at each other's throats. I wish we would just remember to try. I said, yes, and we're continuing to work. So in affection, ACT is a great method, is get them to do the behaviors, so the emotions and the thoughts. Follow. Fake it till you make it. Love your spouse. Do the Love Dare. I love the Love Dare book. And explain to them, you have to try and it takes work. But it's worth the investment. It's worth the effort. CBT, again, we're changing the thought, and we want to see the spouse differently. We need to reframe how we see our spouse. EFT, again, highly, highly recommend you guys go do that training. You expand and reorganize the key emotional responses. We talked a little bit about that. And you promote acceptance of the partner's experience and being responsive to the partner's new behavior and interaction. And so in other words, that's kind of is being responsive to when they do something good and being responsive to their assertive communication. And I love telling clients, I go, when your spouse finally does something you want them to do, positively reinforce it. Marriage is incredibly behavioral. So funny, I had a client once that her husband started emptying the dishwasher, and she goes, wow, you are sexy when you empty the dishwasher. She literally, and I actually asked her a couple months ago, he started unloading the dishwasher every time. Like, bar none. He had never emptied the dishwasher. He empties it every time now. And it just literally by a simple, wow, you're sexy when you empty the dishwasher. He loves it now. He does it all the time. Positive reinforcement works way better than we think. And you know what? And I love it. Like when my wife does something and, like she validates, because she's working on validating. I go, honey, that was a great validation. Thank you. She's like, oh, okay. And then she wants to try more. I mean, it's simple. We know from behavior modification, if you punish behavior, it becomes less. If you encourage behavior, it becomes more. But unfortunately, I see spouses, when they finally get, the thing they want from their spouse, and they're like, well, finally, you, dun, 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 dun. I'm like, do you realize you just punished a good behavior? Now it's less likely. Behavioral modification completely works in marriage. When someone does something good, compliment them, reward them, thank them. Wow, thank you. You loved me in my love language. Thank you. I feel so touched by that. People love praise. So do I. This is actually Ephesians 6:18. I apologize. And pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. This in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. And so I would say in trust, prayer is incredibly important. And with Christian clients, I challenge them. I said, even if it's for 1 minute, even if there's 30 seconds, pray together. Every night, hold hands, face each other, and say a simple prayer. Stormy O'Martian, who I love, she's got 2 books, The Power of Praying Wife, Power of Praying Husband. She said, I couldn't go to God and expect answers to prayer if I harbored unforgiveness, bitterness, or resentment. I couldn't pray my favorite 3 prayer, change him, Lord, without knowing in the deepest recesses of my soul that I had to first pray God's favorite 3-word prayer, change me, Lord. Such a humble statement. I love the fact that she's just saying, look, I struggled. I had bitterness and anger. And I was just praying that God would change him. And what changed her, and I've read both books, what changed her is she finally said, God, change me. And the breakthrough came. And they both started getting well. And so humility and prayer. And so, obviously for Christian clients, is challenge them to pray together, whether it's short or long. And I've had them do it in session. I'm like, stand up. So my clients know when I say something, they have to do it. I just take charge from day one, and it just works well. I'm like, stand up. And they stand up. And they're like, what? Hold hands. Okay. Sometimes I'll have them stand up and hug. Sometimes, I will just command them to do it because honestly, it works. Okay. You have to figure out your own way of doing things, and I would challenge them to pray that they would love their spouse well, as Stormy was saying. Challenge them to pray that themselves, they would change, and as they're praying for each other. So say I'm praying with my wife, and they say, God, please help me to be a better husband for my wife. To pray that in front of her. Challenge them to pray that their spouse feels loved, and challenge them to confess where they've fallen short while praying. And there's been times, honestly, it's a couple of months ago, Tammy and I had such a huge fight that we couldn't even speak to each other. But we got on our knees and prayed together. And I prayed and she prayed, and we confessed, God, I'm sorry that I yelled at my wife. I'm sorry that I'm not loving her as I should. Please help her make me feel loved. And she prayed a similar prayer. And it broke it. It broke the anger. Because there was humility. And there was instant forgiveness. Because we went to God together, obviously for the power of prayer. But that we are confessing our sins to a higher power, God, of what we're doing wrong. And we're owning it. So there's something about humility and owning it that's going to change. The love language books. Gary Chapman, everyone's heard of the love language book, the 5 love languages. It's so popular that most people don't even want to talk about it just because it's so popular. But it's popular because it works. Okay. And I always joke is Gary Chapman is kind of when I read that one was when I first understood every marriage book has the same message. Your spouse thinks differently, figure it out. Love and respect, Men and Mars, Women and Venus, the love languages, all of them, your spouse thinks differently. They have a different Enneagram number. They have different love language. They have a different background. They have a different thought. They have a different brain. Men and women actually literally physically have different brain. Women have more connections between the right and left lobes, why you can do more things at once than we can. Multitask. You can multitask better than we can because you have more connections. Anyway, so Gary Chapman says, how Can we speak each other's love language when we're full of hurt, anger, and resentment over all past failures? That's a great question. The answer lies in the essential nature of humanity. We are creatures of choice. And that is the part of kind of the ACT. I've seen marriages rescued from the brink of divorce when couples make the choice to love. And so this is the faking it till you make it. Loving their spouse in their love language. Obviously, we know words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, physical touch. And again, remember the 125 rule, that your spouse probably is doing more than you even see. And you are noticing because it's something you want anyway. It's just natural. And we get so frustrated, honestly, in my marriage, I get frustrated because I'm words of affirmation, and I want Tammy to give me words of affirmation. And so I easily give her words of affirmation. It's easy for me because that's what I love. But it doesn't really fill her tank. Then I'm like, well, why isn't her tank getting filled? Right? And then I get frustrated. I would love this, right? But that's not what she loves. She wants acts of service. She wants me to empty the dishwasher. Maybe she'll say I'm sexy. But anyway, and so this is such an important concept. It's helping the spouses understand this is how your spouse feels loved. Because I've seen so many couples that are trying to love their spouse in their love language and are mad that their spouse isn't receiving it. So, and that's just ignorance. I mean, that's good. And what I like to say is, wow, look at your good motives. Now we need to have good behaviors. And if we can put them together, you're going to love your spouse well. So Christ himself gave some to apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers, equip his people for works of good service so the body of Christ may be built up till we all reach unity in the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, becoming mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. We're all different, and accepting that we're different. Tim Keller says the assumption is that there is someone just right for us to marry. And if we look closely enough, we'll find the right person. This moral assumption overlooks a crucial aspect to marriage. It fails to appreciate the fact that we always marry the wrong person. The primary problem is learning to love and care for the stranger to whom you find yourself married. And I would agree with that. And honestly, so would Harville Hendricks. We always marry the wrong person. We marry to heal childhood wounds. We marry for irrational reasons. But we are now called to love the person we're married to. And we're called to do the best we can with it. And honestly, people talk about, when they're getting close to divorce, we're just incompatible. Incompatible is not a thing. Opposites often attract. And I would say way more clients I have that are opposites that are the same. And, it's so funny. I've seen second marriages where people marry the same person and it actually drives them more nuts than the opposite. I've heard that complaint multiple times from second marriages. So we often marry our opposite is understanding and accepting and celebrating differences. And I love to tell Tammy, I said, Tammy, you have so helped me with self-control and self-discipline. You've helped me eat better. You've helped me sleep better. And I celebrate. So I celebrate and I praise her and I thank her for what she is bringing to the marriage that is helping me. As well as she tells me, Grant, you help me see things from a grace perspective. You help me learn to validate. And when we're celebrating our differences and celebrating our strengths, we just want to do those strengths more. And we want to encourage and love more. It's just simple positive reinforcement. We all have gender, background, culture, education, experiences, personality types. And that's oftentimes why either using the Enneagram or maybe the Myers-Briggs in session, or having them do it and then come to session and then explaining the differences. Oh, that's why you do that. And it's great when people start going through their Enneagram, for example, and go, oh, you don't do that because you're a jerk. You do that because you're an 8. And they might not say it that bluntly, but they go, oh, so there's a whole category of people that all do it that way. Oh, because we all think that everyone thinks like us, or everyone should think like us. Okay? So say you're married to a perfectionist. They can't understand why you're not perfectionist. Oh. But to understand that there's a whole body of other people out there that aren't either, normalizes. Oh, there's not something wrong with my spouse. There's something different about my spouse. And those differences need to be celebrated and pushed up, and makes for an amazing, incredible marriage. Tim Keller says that marriage is not for our happiness, it's for our holiness. And God uses marriage to refine us and to make us more like Christ and make us better people. And if marriage was easy, it wouldn't do that, right? Suffering develops character. So, and then, lastly, love and respect. If you read Emerson Eggerich's book, talks a lot about, men and women and the differences, and oftentimes women, and again, it's a generalization, is women are looking for more love and men are looking for more respect. Now, men still want love and women still want respect, but it seems to be what kind of fills their tank more, or almost like a love language. And oftentimes men don't understand that, and they're trying to kind of respect their women, and women are trying to, love the men when they're looking for the opposite. So it's almost like a love language thing. And so understanding that better, that's what they're looking for, helps. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility consider your others better than yourself, not looking to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. So is learning to be strong and kind. A phrase I use over and over in my own life, and a phrase I use it over in individual and in couples counseling, is strong and kind. Jesus was strong and he was kind. And he wasn't nice. He was kind. See, when we're nice, we're more worried about us. Nice is to get something out of you. Nice is I lent my neighbor some salt, and if I'm being nice, that means I'm kind of expecting getting something back. But if I'm being kind, then I have no expectation. And the way to know whether it's nice or kind is when they don't pay you back, how do you feel? Are you mad when they don't pay you back? Are you okay? And so oftentimes, clients think, oh yeah, I'm being kind. Then I'm like, well, how do you feel when they don't repay you? Oh, I'm mad. Well, that wasn't kind then. That was nice. That was a deal. And oftentimes we make deals with people that they don't even know that there's deals. And I've explained this to couples. Is that in their mind, they make this deal. Okay, so if I love my wife and I encourage her and I take her to dinner and I do this and that, I'm going to get sex. And that's the guy's thought. And I said, do you realize you've just made up a deal that she didn't agree to? She was not part of this deal. She has no idea. And then when she doesn't take her part of the deal, you get angry. She didn't agree to the deal. And it doesn't always have to be sex. It could be, they think, well, if I budget and I do this and that and the others, my spouse is going to do the same thing. And then when they don't, you get mad. Like, you didn't explain your expectation. And it's amazing how often that you just have to start noticing the patterns. If you start looking for them, you'll see them all over marriages, is these deals that we make in our head that we expect our spouse to do, and then they don't do, and we're mad. But we've never communicated them. It's amazing. So, obviously, scripturally, we lay down our life for our spouse. We love them even when we don't want to. Love, yes, is a feeling, but love, in the Bible is an action. Love is patient, love is kind, it's not envy, it's not boast, not rude, it's not self-seeking. Love is loving the person whether you want to or not. Love is choosing to be kind. However, and this is also important, is when you have someone that's ultra kind, is we also don't want to enable, because enabling is not kind. Enabling is nice. And so if we have a borderline abuse situation, and please hear, in all of these things, a lot of this does not apply if there's abuse. Okay, I probably should have premised that. I apologize. So if there's abuse, that needs to be taken care of first, obviously, because there's no safety. I mean, you're stuck in the safety thing. If there's abuse in any kind, verbal, physical, mental, spiritual, if there's abuse, you can't get out of the safety. And that's the first thing that needs to be established. So I apologize I didn't start with that. But anyway, going back to is not enabling. And, it's helping the enabler realize they're part of what they're doing wrong. We don't want to blame them, but help them understand they're part of the dance. Okay? And so as we often manage people because that's what we saw growing up, or that was our role in our family. I just saw a client yesterday that her job was to manage everyone's emotion in her family. They literally, they almost even said it. And she knew she was in charge of everyone's emotion. So if she gets married, she's single, but if she gets married, she's going to want to manage the emotion of her husband. And she's going to have to watch that. And she's going to have to be careful to not do things to manage his emotion, do things that are right. And it oftentimes we look at things as spouses, well, if I do this, my spouse will react this way. And we're trying to figure out what's the best reaction. When we should ask, what's the best thing, period? What's the healthiest thing? Confronting someone. You might not get a good reaction. Doesn't mean it's wrong. Pacifying someone. Yeah, they might get a good reaction, but it's still wrong. And so we have to do the right actions regardless of the consequence. If you think about it, enabling is Situational ethics. You're trying to figure out, the situation, therefore you're going to change what you want to do based on how you think the person's going to react. And obviously we don't believe in situational ethics. We believe in true absolutes. And obviously we want to teach, our clients about boundaries. And again, this is another thing I find we as therapists assume our clients understand. We want to explain boundaries. We want to push boundaries. We want to help them understand boundaries and establish their boundaries in their marriages. So, no victims or martyrs. And this is kind of coming out of the CBT when they finally start owning their stuff is we must own our emotions, reactions. You cannot say, you made me angry. You say, I became angry when. Okay. Not, you didn't give me a choice. I reacted poorly in my anger. And again, this is going back to role-playing. We're not role-playing, but getting them to do it in session. Okay? And so the great thing about, again, having them do this in session on your couch is that you can correct it, and you can change it, and you can stomp it. So again, we do not own our partner's emotions. And I think this is important, and I say this to my interns, I've heard this a bunch of times, is we need to be comfortable with other people's emotions. And I think oftentimes spouses are not comfortable with their spouse having an emotion that's extreme. Anger, sadness, grief. If you look at a funeral, people go to a funeral and they say stupid things because they're trying to make that person feel better so they feel better. It's a terrible thing to do. I wrote an article on that, actually. 3 things you should say at a funeral and then shut up. Okay? Because oftentimes we feel like someone's feeling something and we want to fix it. Why? Because we're uncomfortable. And so as a therapist, one of the greatest things we can learn is being comfortable with our client being uncomfortable so we don't have to fix them. And so same with the spouse. The spouse needs to be comfortable with their spouse being uncomfortable, having an emotion, and allowing it, giving them space. This is where trust now comes. They now have a safe space in their marriage to emote. A safe space in their marriage to grieve. A safe place in their marriage to be sad and to cry or to be angry. And they need to allow their spouse to have the emotion without managing it, capping it, stopping it, and just letting them go. I think one of the greatest gifts we can give to our spouse is giving them space to emote. But everyone's so afraid of it. And everyone wants to manage it. And everyone wants to fix it. Oftentimes, I get, we'll say the wife comes home and, my boss was doing this and I'm upset. And the guy goes, well, I'm going to tell your boss this, or you should quit that job. And there's this fixing. Why? To fix the situation as opposed to hearing the emotion. And we need to be present and hear. Can we allow our spouses to be angry, hurt, sad, afraid without fixing? Can they sit there in it? And I will do that in session. Let's see here. John Eldridge again. For it is also in the heart of a man and a woman to share some sort of quest, to fight some great battle together. And if we can't find a great battle, we seem to start one with each other, as in to satisfy the itch. And I think that's true. I think we want to battle. We want to do things. We want to do great things. We want to do something. And so I'd like to come together with a couple, as opposed to them fighting each other. Can they fight the world? Can they fight a cause? Can they fight for something as opposed to fighting each other? Humans need a direction. What are you going to do with that direction? And so I would say is, what do they both care about? What could be a common goal? It's so cool. When I got married to Tammy, she knows, as all you know, I love feeding my starving children. Shocking. And she goes, we should go on a mission trip. I'm like, oh, really? Why? She goes, I want to fall in love with what you're in love with. That was so touching. And so, here we are in October, we're going to go on a mission trip, and then we will have a common mission together. And when you're shoulder to shoulder moving in a direction, it's so much easier to be together and cause togetherness. And this is something I think a lot of people haven't done, is do a mission statement for your marriage. We have a mission statement for Stenzel Clinical. Most nonprofits have mission statements. Do you have a mission statement? And them coming together and creating a mission statement. Why does your marriage exist? For what good purpose does your marriage exist? What good is your marriage going to do? And now as you have a common goal and are moving forward, it's hard to fight because you're together. And in many ways you have a common enemy. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so if we both can be, then now we're pouring our angry energy at something else as opposed to ourselves. Fighting injustice. Fighting, a negative thing, whether, it be sex trafficking or, it be, abuse? Can you together volunteer and move towards something better and together make this world better? And it's such a bonding experience. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth, a loving doe, a graceful deer. May her breasts satisfy you always. May you be intoxicated with her love, and so that I have the other side. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine. Sex. We'll have to eventually talk about it, and we have to eventually be comfortable about it, and we're actually going to talk about it in the last part. But those were romantic verses from the scriptures. And I've mentioned a little bit of Harl Hendricks and imago therapy, and this is a great tool. I wanted to give you guys a few tools you could walk away with. So this tool is called re-romanticizing. Re-romanticizing encourages couples to act as if they were newly in love with each other, giving each other the same tender attention, gifts, and words of endearment that came effortlessly during love. Even though many couples begin this exercise with gritted teeth, repetition rewires their neural connections, allowing them to see each other as lovers and friends again, not as enemy combatants. Fake it till you make it. And so this is how that works. Step one is you identify what your partner is already doing that pleases you. Okay, you write down, I feel loved and cared for when you. And so obviously you've got 2 pieces of paper, pens. Identify caring and romantic feelings you used to do. I used to feel loved and cared about when you. And things that you would like them to do. I would like you too. And then what you do is you look at all of them and you give them all 1 to 5. 5 being more important, 1 being least important, so that your spouse sees what is most important to you. And then you exchange lists. And then you try and love each other. And so this is how I feel loved, this is how I feel loved. Yeah.
Do you rank each list? So like you're having like number 1 in the list,
Yeah.
number 2 in the list, and you rank each list.
Yeah, I don't think you have to say there's only 1 5 and only 1 1. It's like you can have 3 5s, you can have 3 3s, you can have 8 1s. That way your spouse sees what the most important ones are that you need.
Okay.
And they also can see what's easy. Hey, I can do this, I can do that. And so it helps you understand your spouse. It helps the client understand their spouse. Yes?
Do you have them do this exercise in the session?
Yes, definitely. And then I'll have them, you can even have them comment, are you surprised by any of this? Did you know this? Is there something you could commit to this week? I love giving homework in marriage counseling. I'm like, okay, what's your assignment? What's your assignment? And what my assignment is, I need to, say she's acts of service. I'm going to put the dishes away every day. Great. We're going to go for that. And then I'm going to look at her and go, okay, be careful with your expectation. The goal is growth. He's going to try. And if he doesn't do it every day, you know what? We're not going to freak out. And then simultaneously, he's supposed to give her words of affirmation. Or I think I did that wrong. She's supposed to give him words of affirmation. And then I'm like, you know what? Again, she's not going to do it perfectly. But we want to, every time it is good, celebrate that and enjoy that and realize, again, this is growth, not perfection. So we want to manage expectations and we want to challenge them to love each other. And honestly, I love to say, I want you to see who's better. Who's the more mature, better spouse? Who can do more loving this week? And just challenge them. Make it a game. Who can do more acts of love this week? And if you have competitive people, that'll really work. So anyway, this is a great tool you can do to help, again, getting those feeling going. And as kind of as Harville Hendricks said, is the neural connections. And we know that from psychotherapy is we have to do things over and over and over to make new paths in our brain. And we want to make new paths of positivity in the brain. Practicals. Having them go on dates. Literally, I can't believe how many spouses don't go on dates on a regular basis. And that's one of my first questions. How often do you guys go on dates? Oh, once every 3 months. Oh, gosh. And again, so I put, take turns making creative surprise dates, unless your spouse doesn't like surprises. So again, you have to think about what your spouse likes. The Love Dare book is a great book. Spouse gratitude list. I used to do this a while ago. I don't know why I've dropped it. Maybe I'll bring it back. Is that I gave them a booklet. It was a 1 through 5, and they had to name 5 things they were grateful about their spouse every day. And they had to come up with 5 new ones every day for 30 days. So it was 150. That's 150 unique things that you're appreciative about your spouse about. Again, rewiring the brain. we have this negative cycle of always looking for the negative, always seeing what's wrong, always complaining, always criticizing, to now finding good, finding positive. It's amazing how we can just rewire the brain. And then sharing that in session. Encouraging to serve each other. I kind of talked about being the mature one. And this is what I like, is be who you really are. Like after they just had a big fight, I go, is that you? Does that represent you well? The way you yelled, the way you called names, the way you attacked her. Is that who you are as a person? Oh no, I would never do that. Then be you. Don't allow your spouse to make you, quote unquote, be someone else. Be you. If you're a kind, loving person, then be a kind, loving person. If you're a kind, loving person to everyone else, don't lose your identity in the anger. Be you. Just another way to challenge them to start doing the right behavior so we can create trust. Another practical, I forgot to do this, and I literally do this every session, is name 5 things your spouse did well this week. I start every session with that, except the first, obviously. And I actually have clients that put it on their phones because they know I'm going to ask it. And they pull out their phones. Okay, my wife did, my husband did, And so I said, okay, let's start naming the things your spouse did well. Creating the new neuronal transmitters. Lastly is connection, the bedroom of the house. Finding healing and refreshing intimacy. So we're going from you're my enemy to you're my friend to you're the lover of my soul. We are now open. We are now safe. We have now created trust that now it's okay and safe to open my heart. Now it's okay to be vulnerable. If you see dogs as they submit to each other, what are they doing? They're showing their belly, their most, fragile, vulnerable part. And that's intimate. And you can't have intimacy without vulnerability. But you can't have vulnerability unless you have trust, unless you have safety. So again, we did all of that work to get now, finally, here, connection. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievance you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And above all this, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Oh, wow. Gary Chapman, at the heart of man's existence is the desire to be intimate and to be loved by another. Marriage is designed to meet that need for intimacy and love. And so here, going to EFT, we're fostering the creation of secure bonds between partners. Psychodynamic. We now want to start facing, processing, and healing childhood wounds that are causing the problems in the marriage. So this is the point, we've made safety, we've made trust. Now we can start sharing, why I have such a hard time taking criticism is because my dad criticized me all the time. And now we can get to that. And now we can heal that. And not only can we start healing that in the spouse, the other spouse can now be sensitive and caring and loving towards that trigger. And that's the goal. CBT, we want to redefine the schema. We want to see our spouse through a different lens and see marriage through a different lens. We go into marriage thinking marriage is about us, marriage is to make me happy, marriage is easy. Wrong. Marriage is hard, marriage is about your spouse, marriage takes work. Brene Brown, who we all love, says, vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, accountability, and authenticity. This is where we want to go now. But he said, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I'll boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in my weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And we know that as therapists, as we are teaching our clients, when you admit fault, when you admit weakness, when you admit struggle is when you're the most courageous, when you're the most strong. And we want them to see that in marriage now, that you are the strongest when you can finally admit your weakness, admit your struggles. And so again, we want to make sure it's our job to protect our clients at all times. It is our job to protect the vulnerability. It's our job to protect them sharing difficult things. So if a spouse is not ready to share, stop. If you don't think a spouse is ready to hear, stop. It is your job, your responsibility to protect their heart, to protect their vulnerability. If we're going to ask them to be vulnerable, it needs to be safe. It is your job to stop anything that is harmful. You need to take charge of every session and never lose control. It is essential in marriage therapy. All vulnerable sharing needs to be given and received in a safe, loving manner. We want to create a new pattern. And we know that one bad action and one good action don't equal each other out. Okay? If I call you a bad name and I give you a compliment, the one compliment does not clean up the one bad name I said. Researchers say it actually takes 5 to 10 compliments to make up for the one bad. And that's why we don't want them to even have one bad experience sharing the vulnerability, sharing the weakness, sharing the hurt. We want everyone to be positive. True biblical intimacy is developing the ability to be uncomfortably close and vulnerable with another imperfect human being. And that's the scary part. And that's why we're all scared of love. We all want love, but we're all scared of it. It takes vulnerability and honesty with an imperfect human that may not accept us. So we know we can't have intimacy without vulnerability. We all want to be known and accepted. And for the spouses to say, this is the goal, to know and to accept. We want to start recognizing broken attachments. And you'll see those play out. And as you do marriage counseling more and more, you'll see, as you see the spouses interact with each other, you'll start even knowing what their childhood was like before you even ask them. Because you'll see patterns. If you see someone shut down, they were probably shut down as a child. If you see someone trying to power up, if you see someone trying to manage emotions, that was probably their role as a kid. And so we want to start recognizing those broken attachments they had to their mom or their dad. And their marriage, when healthy, can be a great healing salve for that. My lovely wife, just when she was young, she just wanted her father to delight in her, to see her. And he's a much better man now, but at the time, she was the fourth child, and he just kind of ignored her, and he just wanted her out of the way. And that's an attachment that's been broken. And so I know I have to be very, very careful with that. When she wants attention, I can't just go, oh no, and go on my phone, which I've done. I've made that mistake. I need to pay attention to her. And as she kind of twirls, and as she's kind of beautiful, and I pay attention to her, that's now starting to heal that bond, heal that wound that's in her, that father wound. And now as I love on her and as God loves on her, she's healing. And she's so much healthier. And fortunately, she's done most of her healing with God. In EFT, it teaches secondary emotions elicit negative reactive patterns. Obviously, anger. If we're acting on our secondary emotion, anger or whatever, usually it's just anger, we're going to push people away. But if we finally get to the primary emotion, it draws people near. When someone's angry, you kind of naturally just pull back. When someone's sharing something you're hurt, you naturally pull in. So even physically, we do it. But emotionally, it is going to bring clients together. I cannot tell you how many times I've had clients start sharing about a difficult childhood, and the spouse is crying. And the spouse is like, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. And they hurt for them, and they cry for them. And it softens them. And not only do they apologize, they go, I'm so sorry of everything I've done that's triggered that. I now see how I'm reminding you of your dad or your mom. And there's been such great healing when you finally get them to see each other's wounds. And there's empathy and sympathy. And you're seeing your spouse as just another wounded individual. And so we want to positively reinforce it. And so when people finally share those difficult times, we want to praise their courage. Thank you for sharing. And that's whether individuals or couples. You know that. If anyone shares something vulnerable, you just say, thank you for the courage. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for respecting and trusting me enough to share that. Thank you. And then these are great questions to ask. When your husband speaks this way, how do you see him? Like he just shared something. What do you see right now? Or what do you hear when your wife shares this wound? What are you hearing? You say, wow, I just see a scared little girl. Or, wow, I just see a boy that's broken down. And then there's love and acceptance and healing that happens. Harville Hendricks says, regrettably, many of us has unattuned parents. And we bring the resulting unmet need into our adult relationships. Not only did we experience disconnection from our parents, we began to feel disconnected from part of ourselves, which is so true as you do individual counseling. And so in marriage therapy, we see this coming out. And Harville Hendricks, in his book, Imago Therapy, which is Getting the Love You Want, his primary theory is we marry to heal childhood wounds. And it's our childhood wounds that are causing our dysfunction in our marriage. And getting to that, healing that, is what heals our marriage. So it's getting to the real problem. And so this is, again, where we need to start changing our beliefs. We're all wounded and scared. And we know the phrase, hurt people, hurt people. And I use that all the time. When I have, people hurting each other, I said, you're both hurting. And I try and validate their hurt and their fear and their pain. We have a phobia of vulnerability and expression of needs because they were punished and not positively reinforced as a child. We're afraid of asking for what we need because it didn't go well. And again, my client yesterday, she would go to her parents and ask for something, and they would say she was ridiculous for asking for it or get it herself. So guess what she doesn't do now? She doesn't ask people for help. And she's completely codependent, and she takes care of everyone, and no one takes care of her. Why? She was taught it, and she's just playing it out. And so she and I are working on, in therapy, is finally getting her to ask people, safe people, for something. Obviously, safe people. And hopefully that's when we create the marriage as a safe place where they can ask each other for things. We want to help the client and the spouse see the origin of the wounds, the fears, the triggers. The genogram is great for that. And Rita's going to be doing a training in November, I believe, on the genogram. And so doing a genogram for each one and going it over with your client so they can see the childhood wounds, they can see the dysfunction. And hopefully, and the goal again is to create empathy and sympathy and understanding triggers. Bless you. So then, the spouse asks themselves, how am I reinforcing this fear or negative message, and how can I help heal this fear or negative message? And this is where we're getting to. Now we're on a common path of trying to heal each other. Wow, that's a wound for you. I'm going to try and heal that. I'm going to try to speak into that. I'm going to try and love that. And I see my wife doing that. She knows them words of affirmation, and I often have a lot of self-doubt. I think there's something wrong with me. I think I'm lazy. I think whatever. Because I had every teacher ever say that he's a bright student, he doesn't apply himself. My mom literally stopped going to parent-teachers conferences. And I have this belief in me, and I've told my wife that, and she, when I'm about to do something, will send me a text. You're a warrior. You can do this. You're strong. And I showed her this last night, and she's like, I'm so proud of you. And she's starting to heal that wound of mine. And that's what we can do. And that is what makes an amazing marriage. And we have to remember mental health is the invisible handicap. If you're out for dinner and you see a kid that looks normal acting out, you judge the parents. What's wrong with those parents? Why won't they control their kid? But maybe that kid has autism and you don't know. But if you see a kid with Down syndrome, which is obviously there's something wrong, and the kid's acting out, you're like, oh, those poor parents, right? Your view of that person changes the entire dynamic of how you view it. But we need to understand, as mental health is the invisible handicap, is we need to see our spouse as hurt and broken. But usually because we fight, when we fight, well, what do? We come off tough. We come off strong. Or we come off running. And we don't see our spouse as a wounded individual. We see them as this big, strong bully, meanie, or person that just runs. But we need to see our spouse differently. We need to see the spouse as someone who's just a fellow wounded sojourner in this world. So how do we speak up with our needs without complaining, nagging, or discouraging our spouse? With positive reinforcement is starting with the positive, trusting your spouse wants to love you, explaining your need. I'm going to kind of fly through this because we're almost out of time. Explaining how your partner can help you with this need. Express and know that your partner will need time and grace. Say, hey, I'm asking you to do this. I know you're not going to do it perfectly. I'm not going to ask you to do it perfectly. I'm not going to expect you to do it perfectly. But that'd be great if you could grow in this area. And thank you for your spouse when they meet your need. Obviously, again, positively reinforcing. Tim Keller says, to be loved and to be known is comforting, but superficial. Unknown. To be known and to be not loved is our greatest fear. But to be fully known and truly loved is, well, a lot like being loved by God. It is what we need more than anything. It liberates us from pretense, humbles us out of our self-righteousness, and fortifies us for any difficulty life can throw at us. When we are known, that's all humans want. We want to be known and we want to be accepted. And that's what we go into marriage looking for and we don't find. And then we fight or we flight when we don't get it. So I'm actually going to skip this because I'm trying to fly through this. And so again, seeing your spouse as God declares, fearfully and wonderfully made, unique and incredibly gifts and talents, lovable, a sinner saved by grace, a work in progress, and a gift God specifically picked for you in his sovereignty. We want to see our spouse as an inner wounded child, scared, hurt, and wounded, needing love, support, and safety, reacting to them as best we can, and seeing them and understanding. And I think often we all feel at one time that we're just a child in an adult body trying to exist. There's times I feel like I'm just a 6-year-old in a 48-year-old body trying to exist with adults with childlike abilities and coping skills. And it's overwhelming. But so does everyone. But everyone comes off like they're so confident. Everyone comes off like they're so well. That's why we think everyone else is fine and we're not, because we know our inner thoughts. And so if we can understand that about our spouse, then it becomes empathy and caring. And we also want to see them as a fellow shipwrecked sojourner, knowing we're all wounded, we all need help. And we use fight or flight coping skills during emergencies. And so giving grace and understanding when a spouse yells, when a spouse flees. That it's not personal, not taking it personally. So understanding fight or flight, understanding the biology of fight or flight explains it better than just taking it personally. Well, my spouse is running away from me because they don't care. No, your spouse is running away from you because of childhood wounds and because of fight or flight. It's not personal. And if we cannot personalize these behaviors, there's a lot less anger and a lot more, again, understanding. Lastly, the couple verses from Song of Solomon. God intended sexual intimacy as a healthy high. He designed our brains to bond unforgivably with positive experiences like sex. And we as therapists need to be comfortable talking about sex. It's okay. I'm so comfortable that I had a client in their 80s and I talked to them about their sex life. I was like, okay, here we go. And unfortunately, I'm glad I had some experience before I got to that, because he was having some problems. And I'm like, honey, and she was like upset that he was having problems. Like, honey, he's made it to 80 and not used pills yet. This is not about you. She was like, he's not attracted to me anymore. I'm like, no, this is biology. So it was a great conversation and it was helpful, but it was good because I was comfortable talking about it. And if you're uncomfortable, your clients will find that you're uncomfortable and they won't want to talk about it. Sex is a huge part of a marriage and needs to be talked about. And we have so many cognitive dissonance and cognitive distortions about marriage. It is an important part of marriage. And many of our wounds will reveal themselves here. And we have cognitive distortions. We think sex is dirty. Sex is for my pleasure. It's not important or it's utterly important. And we have these distortions and we have to start getting into these and these lies so that we can understand that sex is great and made by God within marriage. That it's for your spouse's pleasure, that it is important but not utterly important. The McDonald's are coming in October to talk about sexual addiction, so I'm not even going to talk about sexual addiction or affairs. But again, be comfortable with talking about sex. It's just a normal part of marriage. And honestly, most people are afraid to talk about sex because we don't talk about it. We're actually one of the few societies that don't. We don't talk about death and we don't talk about sex, even though everyone's dying and everyone's having sex. But we don't talk about it because we're scared. And so to demystify that. And so at the end of this, I'm not going to go over all these, is a whole bunch of books and kind of like a summation of what I would say those books are and some quotes from them. Those are all some just great marriage books that I encourage you to read. Let me end in prayer. It's almost 12. Father God, thank you so much that you made marriage to grow us, refine us, as well as from our pleasure and love. Father, I pray you would help our marriages. You would help us to help others' marriages. And God, that every couple that comes to Stenzel Clinical would find safety. Lord God, that they would find trust and they would find intimacy and you would heal every marriage. Lord God, that people would come and find hope in healing. Thank you for this time in Jesus' name. Amen.